So welcome to all the things you can do in AWS once you know Python. Obviously, this is clickbait, and I will not be showing you every single thing you can be doing in AWS, but I will do my best to show the most that we can during this session. And like Joseph said, I really welcome your questions, so please pop them in the chat as we go. And so hello from Brisbane, Australia. And I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. So this is something that happens in real life at events in Australia because of the history of the country and that the land was stolen. So always take time to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and pay respect to elders past and present. This isn't something you would normally do on a video call. However, I really try to do this for all of the international speaking that I do because it's a really rich part of Australian history that doesn't really get told a lot. So next time you're visiting Australia or you're thinking about visiting Australia, make sure you look at the traditional owners of the land, and it's just a really good way to connect with the country. So more about Brisbane. This is some of the team at Blackbook AI where I work. I'm head of enablement for AI, machine learning and data, which is a fake sounding job title, but a very real job. Essentially, I do pre-sales consulting across AI, machine learning, data, and lots of other things. There's about 150 staff across the company, and we solve some pretty interesting problems. And there's 3 AWS badges there, which I'm very excited about because we just got machine learning services competency last week, which was a lot of work, but very exciting. And so who's this session for? This is structured a little bit differently because I wanted to come at this from 2 directions. So the first one is hatchlings, which is technically the term for a baby Python. So people who are new to Python will get lots of value out of this because there's lots of avenues. But on the other side of this is also for leaders. And one of the things that's really helpful if you go into an entry-level session or something that's for people that are new to something as a leader, that means you're really well set up when it comes time to really guide your team through this when they ask you questions about it, and you've got an idea of what entry-level people know. So depending on which side of this you're sitting on, really just take it from both sides and see what you can do with this. And I think that will really help you to get more value out of today's session and the rest of the conference as well. So first of all, what do Python and AWS have in common? They're good, first of all, that's not on the slide, but they're really well documented. Both have lots of different documents and learning resources and everything, which makes them really beginner friendly as well, just because there's so many people making different types of content out there. So usually you can find what you need. They also both lead to lots of job opportunities, and they're pretty employable skills to have in tech, which is really good because you can apply them to lots of different things or industries or different types of problems that you're solving. And this happens as well with Python, but the pro of AWS is that you can do heaps of things with it. And the con is that you can do heaps of things with it. So I also, outside of my day job, I'm an AWS community builder for machine learning. And being part of the program, there's so many more services than I really was aware of before. These are only some of the service icons. There's so many of them. And even if I put a fake one in here, no one would realize. So it gets a bit overwhelming for new people just because there's honestly so many different things you can do. So it's really hard to find where to start. And I find the same thing happens with Python, just because everyone says it's a really good language to learn if you want to get into software generally, because you can do so many different things with it and different applications like you would have heard about at the conference. But it's honestly really overwhelming. Once you get past the initial Hello World Introduction to Python course, it's really overwhelming to make the jump from getting through that beginner level course that was really approachable to actually building projects. And the same thing can happen on AWS, which is just a bit overwhelming for new people, simply because there's so many different things you can do with it. This is a good time. They're suffering from success. Now's the time where I tell you, in Brisbane, Australia, it's actually currently just past midnight. So if I say anything unhinged or there are unhinged jokes through this, I apologize in advance. And I will do my best to answer any questions as well. And so through the presentation as well, I'll go through some examples, but I also have put in some top tips throughout. And these are just different things that I find really helpful, not only when learning this stuff myself, but also managing people as well. So I studied pure mathematics at university. I'm not a software engineer. That's not really my background, but I have sort of really fallen into this, especially from a machine learning angle. So I've gone through and learnt Python and then AWS as well, but not with the normal background that you might have in a field. So I really had to take the law into my own hands with this, just to really get a good feel for the documentation. Additionally, I'm terrible at names. I've never been good at it. And like you saw on the previous slide, most of the AWS icons look exactly the same. So I found it really hard. So these are some of my cards I have. They're on the screen as well. These are really helpful when I'm learning AWS because I can make architecture diagrams in front of me on a table, or I can use these to remember different things about how the services build or what they can do. And it just helps a lot to really differentiate between them. And you don't have to make these cards necessarily, but it's just a really good way of starting off by thinking about different ways you can learn and engage with the content. Everyone has different learning styles and their brains work in different ways. And as a neurodiverse person, it's something that's really helped me. So not 100% what we're talking about today, but I really did want to start off with this. S3 is a snake emoji because there's 3 S's together. So it's glue rhymes with shoe, obviously. Aurora is Sleeping Beauty. So you don't have to go this far, but really a big theme of learning AWS, where there's so much jargon and so many new concepts, especially if you're not from this background, is really find a way at the start to just find anything that works with you and run in that direction. So for me, that was these cards. Yeah, hopefully you can do something that's less involved than that at least. But this is really helpful both if you are a hatchling and if you are a leader. The other top tip, learn X and Y minutes, is one of my most used Python resources. And for any programming language, it's open source. So there's so much there. There's so many different languages there. And it's just a really good overview of getting started with the language. I always forget how to do things between languages if I'm swapping between them quite frequently. So it's really good to have just as a reference point. But then as well, if you're a leader and you're trying to help your hatchlings to get more confident with what they're doing, this will really help you to give them something where they can get easy information. It's all on one page. It's not super distracting. And all of the key ingredients are there, which will help them to build anything. So highly recommend this website. Also, as you can see, there's a QR code here. I've got them throughout the presentation. I hope they're all accurate. I think they are, but I know there's probably one wrong. But keep in touch with these throughout the presentation, and I will try to share my slides as well so you can come back to the links. So don't stress if you don't get them. And this is what we'll be going through today in the session. So we'll go through some basic building blocks and then some more exciting things, and then talk about some next steps with training. And the thing with basic building blocks is that no one wants to necessarily focus on these. It's never really what people are thinking about. And Lambda is a really good example of this. So AWS Lambda is serverless computing, and it's really, really helpful. And it helps people to do so many things in AWS that they want to build in. So if they want anything event-driven, so when someone uploads a photo here, maybe a thumbnail is auto-populated elsewhere, all of this event-driven compute, so helpful, but it just doesn't sound exciting to beginners. So they don't really spend time on it all the time. So if you have a hatchling that's really interested in this, absolutely help them get in that direction. There's so many really good serverless resources on AWS. But also if someone's really not interested in it, try to show them the function of AWS Lambda through something that they're more interested in so that they can realize the value of it and they don't skip through these really fundamental building blocks that will help everything else to make sense. And you can write Lambda in Python to really help you process data at scale, run interactive backends with the event-driven nature of this. And then you can use this to enable ML insights. This is one thing. Lots of beginners will always want to skip straight through to that ML insight, but they won't realize necessarily how that happens. So lots of this does come through from Lambda. Additionally, the sheep picture is here because that's on my card. And I have gone through and done that for all of these just so they end up looking differently. If I had a picture of computers, you would never remember which example was which. So I've gone through and they will be probably nonsense seeming pictures, but they do make sense. And that will help you remember which part you were up to when you're coming back to look at the notes. So where can you learn more about this? This Lambda doc is really, really helpful. And it just shows you start to finish how to build those Lambda functions with Python, which will help you to unlock all of those other experiences. Really, really recommend it. There's also this serverless hello world with AWS Lambda, which is a really good overall basic getting started guide. I'd recommend starting with this one if you're a hatchling because it will really take you through from the start, but then you can move on to the other docs as well. The next thing we'll talk about is the Cloud Development Kit, which is a CDK. And it just really helps you to define cloud infrastructure in your favorite Python programming language, which is Python, but you can use other languages as well. And it will give you high-level components and that you can use to pre-configure cloud resources. Once again, this is not exciting for beginners, but it is so, so helpful in practice. So especially if you're a leader in an enterprise and you're working with hatchlings, really try to steer them towards this because it will help your overall cloud practices as an organization and just help them to start from scratch in a positive way. But yeah, this is not what beginners usually get excited about, even though it's exciting to me at least. And this sort of takes you through the building blocks. So there's constructs, which are the inner layer, which are composed together to form these stacks, which then make apps. And then you can see that makes a CloudFormation template, which can bring your resources together. So really, really helpful in practice, completely not exciting to beginners. So I really hope that at least maybe there's one hatchling in the chat that's really excited about this. And it's just because it makes it really easy to build everything else that you're actually excited about, which is a common theme here. And the onboarding process, so good, especially if you're in a large enterprise. And it's also really helpful for hatchlings because you can do everything within your IDE that you're already using. So you don't need to go into the management console if you don't really need to. You can do everything there and add all your customizations, which is really helpful. And then you can share that through. So if you're working on large teams, it's really, really helpful and just good from the ground up. This CDK workshop is really, really in-depth and it is fantastic. That's the address, but it's actually an AWS workshop. They also have this Slack channel specifically about CDK. It's really good. And you'll be able to get more information. The workshop does go through in other languages. So if you are fluent in other languages, it will help you as well to contrast those. And it also will give you a really good overview of what it actually looks like in practice. So Boto 3 is the SDK for Python. If you're wondering why there's a dolphin on this and why its name is Boto, we'll come to that in just a minute. But for now, it's a way you can create and configure AWS services like EC2, which is Elastic Compute Cloud, and S3, which is Simple Storage Service. And it provides you an object-oriented API as well as some low-level access to AWS services. So once again, so helpful in practice, really helping you to get started quickly in the same way that the CDK was working as well. So why would you use this? Once again, so it makes it easy to build everything that you're actually excited about building. Really helpful in practice. Also, out of all the AWS services, this is my absolute favorite origin story. So it's called Boto 3 and it's actually written by a customer initially. Mitch, it links to his tweet that he's talking about making it. He made it back in 2006 when AWS wasn't doing this yet. He had a problem and he solved it. And then it's just grown from there. So Boto 3, because it's at the third version and it really has changed drastically since it was first introduced. And it's named Boto after this Amazonian dolphin, which was on the previous picture. Ben Kehoe's article is fantastic. Really recommend it as a resource. His whole blog is really good, but the specific article, and it's got a whole section at the end where I found out about the history and the name, which was really fantastic. Can't recommend that enough. So that's why we had a dolphin. Hopefully this gets you to try it because it is really helpful in practice when you are working in large teams. If you show people the dolphin picture, maybe they'll get more jazzed about it. And where can you learn more? This Getting Started hands-on guide, fantastic. So it shows you how to create and manage a non-relational database with DynamoDB, which is a key value database, essentially, in AWS. So helpful. And one of these Getting Started hands-on guides is a sort of 100-level workshop from AWS. So they go 100 for absolute beginners, 200, 300, 400, up to expert and advanced. So this is a really good way to skip through this and just start from scratch the correct way. Now we can skip through to some of the more exciting opportunities as part of this. And while we're at this slide, I will say if there's any questions you have, now's a really good time to start thinking about those and typing them in the chat, and we can get to them all at the end. So another top tip is to make book reports. I don't know if you do this in the States, but in Australia, in primary school, which is our elementary school, we would have to write book reports whenever we read a book. And as someone, I read a lot, so I wrote a lot of these as a child. And essentially you just go through and write some facts about the book, things you learnt, maybe something you really enjoyed. Sometimes you would also, if you listen to, you were reading a story and you would draw a picture from the story, super helpful. Hatchlings, this is a fantastic way to keep track of everything that you've learnt, track your skills over time, and really get a feel of what you're skilling up in and what you need to work on. Because you can write this for anytime you do a workshop or anytime you go through and build something that you see in the docs, or anytime any of those other things happen, you can go through and do that for your book report. And just keep a diary somewhere in paper, or you can make a Google form is a really easy way to do this. You can just fill it out and it will auto-populate for you. But just looking at how you're tracking over time and how it's growing. And then instead of drawing a picture from the story, draw the architecture. So don't just use the architecture diagram that you're given, draw it out, actually work it through. If it's not on cloud and there's no architecture diagram, draw some really good flowcharts to explain it. So get ready to communicate what you've learned as if you were creating a book for someone else of these book reports. So maybe they'd be really helpful knowledge. The other thing that's sometimes in book reports is you would have to say what age group it was useful for, or what someone might be interested in if they wanted to read the book. And the same thing happens with these workshops, because if you're, for example, a leader and you've got some hatchlings with you, if all of your hatchlings are filling out these book reports and they're learning different things at the same time, when someone goes to, they say, oh, I really want to learn how to do something serverless, someone will have done a book report about it, so they can go through and see what they've already written about it, and then they'll get some good resources on it. Really helpful to just start your team communicating really helpfully from the start is really, really valuable in enterprise. Helping people to just not start with tech debt, so you can really get in a habit of just that sharing knowledge culture is so, so helpful. As well as helping people to realize how far they've come, because for beginners, it's really, really important for them to celebrate their wins along the way. And this just gives you a nice structured way to do that, as well as a really good thing to look back on at the end of the year if you need to review how much they've learned, or you need to see if there's anything else that they maybe haven't covered in these workshops that they might need more training on. It's just a really good way to get in touch. I never hear about people doing things like this for workshops. I think people just sort of tinker. I know I always tinker on my own, and I just didn't formalize it for a long time, but writing something like a book report is so helpful. And I really would encourage, it's something you can start doing in your team and start really fostering that mindset. And that will help you a lot, regardless of what language you're doing or what you're really working on. And even if you're on your own versus in a team, it will still help you regardless. So this section as well, we're going to go through some more broad workshops and resources that will happen, and we can see how they'll all fit together. So this Learn to Code with Python on AWS is classed as a 300 workshop from AWS, but I don't really believe that. It's much more entry level if you would like to actually step through learning to code with Python using AWS. It's really, really helpful. It uses the Cloud9 IDE, which is AWS's Cloud IDE, obviously, and really helpful just for starting from the basics. This is really helpful, for example, in your book reports. If you've realized that someone's missed a few key aspects of learning Python from scratch because they've been doing little workshops and they've maybe missed out the fundamentals, this course is fantastic for that if you're a leader and really working things out. The other segment of this is if you're working with people that are maybe new to you and you don't know where their skills lie. If you can see how they move through each aspect of this, you'll see what they're comfortable with and what they're not. So maybe what they might need to work on in future. It's just a really good way to sort of level the playing field and work out if there's a common ground between everyone, which is really helpful with entry-level docs. Additionally, we'll just step through how to do a number of things. So setting up and using Cloud9, which is the Cloud IDE, and the Python IDE within that. You get to use virtual environments, you learn variables, you learn Python data types, how to define functions, all of these things. And then at the end, you actually get to use Amazon Translate. So Amazon Translate is an AI service that translates text, and it's really helpful. So it's not just knowing that it exists, but you get to actually do it in practice. So to be able to, I really like to recommend this for beginners because you can lure them in with some artificial intelligence and machine learning, but they learn a lot of really functional skills along the way. And I think that's really the key to finding something that does work between them. This is actually a level 100 workshop. And this is one of those getting started hands-on web workshops similar to the previous one about Lambda that we were talking about. And this shows you how to build a basic web application, which is so helpful in practice. So you can deploy a web application and then you can add interactivity as well using Lambda for your event-driven interactivity. And then you also use API gateway and you'd use DynamoDB, which is that key value database we were talking about. Really, really helpful. This is a really good this is a really good way to move on from the previous course with Python, but it's also really helpful to start getting people more interested in different database types. That's why Dynamo is really helpful for this if they haven't really, maybe they've come from a business background, not software, so they only are really familiar with SQL. This is a really good way to get them more enlightened about different database types and data structures, which can open a lot of doors for you in that way as well. As well as this is a really good functional framework. And I'll go through this is the architecture diagram, like I was saying, super helpful. So it's just really, really basic. AWS Amplify is interactive front-end service. Outside of this talk, AWS Amplify has had a lot of work done to it and a lot of updates in the last year, and it's come a long way. So if you haven't looked at it in a long time, it's really exciting, but not very Python themed. And it uses API gateway. You get to use some IAM, some identity and access management. I think I have the card for that somewhere. Yes, this one's got the twin emoji for that one. That shows you how to get IAM involved as well, which if you have enterprise IAM policies, it's a really good way to sort of weave that into the conversation as well. And then using Lambda as well before DynamoDB. So really helpful, really basic from the ground up in practice. And there's so many ways you can extend this once someone gets more skills, or you can use this as a base point if you're learning to then get everything moving so you can start to add on all the other things that you were excited about. Now you know that this is a blueprint for a basic web app. So you can really go in so many different directions from there. Another top tip. This actually came up in one of my TikTok videos recently, but don't forget you're allowed to build things just for fun. Self-care and being able to just build things for fun. I think sometimes we get stuck in the realm of, oh, I can only work on side projects that I can turn into a new unicorn startup, or I can only work on side projects that I can enter in some sort of competition at university. I know that happens for me. There's lots of different opportunities, and remind yourself that you're allowed to build things just for fun. I think there's so many different there's always different money-driven things you can do, especially in AWS, but also in Python, and allow yourself to build things for fun and to enjoy building things and to get lost in being inquisitive. And there's so many, it's such a gift with AWS to be able to do that and really move through different things you can work out and how you can structure what you're learning. So allow yourself the gift of being inquisitive. I know it sounds very woo-woo, but it is really important. So being able to just have fun with it and use that to fuel your learning more. And a really good way to do that in an enterprise is with AWS DeepRacer. So I wish I had a card to pull up and show you, but they're essentially about this big little reinforcement learning. So they're autonomous vehicles. I believe they're 1/18th scale vehicles, and they race around tracks. They race around tracks in real life. So you can, if you ever go to a summit or other different AWS community events, they might have tracks and cars there. Alternatively, there's also races online. So you can race through the regular AWS console. Or if you are a student at college, there's a special student league as well, which has a bit of a different user interface. I much prefer the student user interface. I will show screenshots from that, but it's just really clean and nice as a user interface. And it's a really good way to get people learning with Python because you are racing on the quality of the model that you build in Python. So it's super interesting. If you are a hatchling, I really recommend this to actually see something happening in real life from your code. If you've never worked on a big project where your code has changed something physical, it's always really exciting to see. I know that sounds very weird in practice, but in real life, it's very exciting. And I would recommend it if you can do it. And if you are a leader, try and see if you can get a track for your next company event. It's really, people get really competitive and it brings out the absolute worst in people, which is fantastic at workplace events. But it brings out the worst of them to do better at Python. So they're still fueled towards success in that sense. And really, there's really good prizes if you're willing to be competitive in this, but it's also pretty exciting just to see everything pushing through. And so this is just this is part of the student interface, but you get to make more choices in the management console version. And so you choose the algorithm, whether you want to do proximal policy optimization or you would like to do soft actor critic. And then from here as well, you choose, so there's these sample reward functions. There are loads of sample reward functions, but these are the ones they give you to start out with, whether you want to just try and follow the center line of the track or stay within the borders or prevent zigzag. And then other people will make their own entirely, or some people calculate the optimal race line throughout the entire track, because there's different tracks that you choose when you're racing, and they'll calculate the optimal track and then just train it to follow that race line that they've made. Some people just like to pretend to be Lewis Hamilton in Formula One. There's different opportunities, but for this follow the center line code, this is the reference function they give you for following that center line. So this is what it gives you as standard, but you can go through and edit this to be more competitive. So in this example, you're reading in the input parameters that come from the sample function, but there's lots of different parameters. If you go through the documentation on the management console, if you're a leader, there's so many different input parameters. And the actual physical cars have LiDAR in them as well now as cameras, so lots of different inputs. And then you're calculating markers that are distances from the center line. And this is a good example of ways you could improve this. So you could add more markers that were different distances from there. It just has 3, but you could have 5 or 6 if you wanted. And the entire idea of reinforcement learning is essentially if you give a dog a treat for being good and you want it to keep being good, is positive reinforcement. So that's reinforcement learning. And so this is setting the reward based on how far away it is from the center line. So that's really the baseline of this, but it's pretty interesting to see it happen in person. And if maybe someone's only learnt some if statements and some returns, like this Python is not actually that hard to see what's going on for this reward function. So it's a really good way that people in your teams can really play at the level that they're at and then get value out of it regardless of what level they are, because if you have beginners, they'll do a beginner's version, but other people will really make it a 10. So it's a good way to let everyone work things out. And SageMaker Studio Lab, with a Labrador in a studio, clearly, is an in-browser machine learning playground. This was debuted at reInvent last year, which is a really big trade show that they have in Las Vegas. Fantastic. So it's in browser, completely free. I was so early, I have just Brook as my username. So maybe if you're early too, you can have a really short username, which is always very exciting. And it's all based on Jupyter IDE and Jupyter notebooks, which you can make in your browser. It also integrates with GitHub really easily. So if you already have notebooks on your GitHub, you can just load them in there super easily. And you can choose for your free compute if you want to compute on CPU or GPU, depending on the type of models you're running. And you get to keep what you build because you do get persistent storage, which is really helpful for storing model artifacts. There's so many resources on here. So they have all of these example notebooks within the AWS docs, which are preloaded into it. There's also a specific library for deep learning. There's also a specific library which is like featured for the Hugging Face natural language programming. Super interesting. So many different things you can do with it. And it's a really good way to start if you have someone or you are someone who's really worried about pressing the wrong button and spending $1,000 on a GPU somehow. This doesn't even take your credit card. So they can't bill you for it. So it's a really good way to sort of start with the bumpers up when you're bowling and not worry about setting anything on fire, because it's also not connected to your main AWS account. So if you have people that are really anxious about failure, it's a good way to start, because they can't break it. It's really easy to try, but then they can still do actual machine learning models using Jupyter and using actual GPUs. So you can get lots of really good results out of it, and it mitigates a lot of the stress that I've seen so many times in junior devs. A step up from this is Machine Learning University. So AWS only recently-ish made this public, but these are the courses developed by the data scientists at AWS to train machine learning people at AWS, and they just made it public, but it is fantastic. So they have GitHub libraries to go along with videos that are full courses, multi-day courses, teaching you all about machine learning from a really good foundation. If you're someone that's maybe you've been in software broadly, but you don't have machine learning training and you don't want to just sort of click through things, you want to get a really thorough understanding of how and why and what's happening, really, really recommend Machine Learning University. This also is built into SageMaker Labs, so you can run all of the labs for free in your SageMaker Studio labs without having to really set that much up, because there's a link to directly click into it. So it's really, really helpful. You can go through, these are the 4 main courses that they have videos for, but there's all sorts of content in there. So you could do natural language processing for text, tabular data, which is really good if you'd like to learn more about regression models specifically, as well as some neural networks in there. The computer vision course is really fantastic to get a thorough understanding of this. One of the things, there's lots of different services for computer vision, like recognition, especially on AWS, but there's so many others. And this gives you a really good way to do that from the ground up, from scratch, with rigor and with Python as well. So it's really, really helpful. And the decision trees and ensemble methods course is really, really helpful if you want to learn more about, especially feature importance and boosting. When I have staff who need to learn about it, this is always where I send them. So it's really helpful. And it's just a really good overall resource with, I studied maths at university, so I always try to get something that actually does go through some of the maths in a way that people can definitely understand. And the public are a bit benefited here because the course is already good because people have done it so many times internally at AWS. So you've already had the training wheels run through and you can just really push through yourself on it. This is a 400 level workshop. So this is probably one of the highest level workshops they actually run. I think they do sometimes have 500s, but I haven't really seen them in the wild. And this is managing IoT Greengrass with AWS SDK. So that's a software development kit for Python. And this will show you how to automate provisioning of the IoT Greengrass resources by writing Python code. So you're provisioning all of those resources with Python, which is really helpful, not just because you get to use IoT, but because you're actually doing the provisioning. And you can also really set yourself up for doing this at scale as well, because that's how that always happens. If you're needing to do this, there's a well-architected framework for AWS that steps through how to do this at scale really reliably. And this is just really good foundations for learning how to do that with an example. And you can use AWS Lambda functions in this. So this is a butchered version. I do have the actual architecture diagram, but this is a butchered version of what goes through in the workshop. So you've got user uploading an image, then there's a camera, and the controller is checking the image and using Lambda and MQTT to then set off an alarm light as well. So the actual architecture diagram is this. So as you can see, there's a pretty good mix of services across here. The correct and incorrect images down there in the sample are essentially what it's detecting. So it's looking to see if it's being shown the correct image, in which case it shows the green light, and if it's incorrect, it shows the red light. But this uses some really, really interesting mix of service, and it's all happening in Python as well, which is really, really, it's a good way of showing that you can do IoT with Python, just because it opens up another realm people hadn't really thought of. Lots of people go down a data route, but doing IoT with it is really interesting. And I would recommend that workshop, maybe if you're a bit more intermediate to advanced, but it's pretty engaging. And glue, yeah, my card for glue, it rhymes with shoe. That's the only reason there's a shoe there. But essentially, it's a fully managed ETL service. If you're coming from a database, data warehousing angle, this is so, so helpful. And the GitHub I've linked to has sample job scripts as well, so you can look through and see how that's all working. This GitHub is fantastic. The AWS samples one more generally, but especially for glue, there's some really good Python in there. And glue is serverless. So these are just some of the things that it can do to really make your data easier to deal with in a lot of other services, including joining it, cleaning it, resolve choice method. It's also not on this list, but the find matches ML transform is on this as well, really helpful. And you can do your conversion of character encoding. Not that exhilarating, but really helpful in practice if you have someone from data. And this is the find matches transform I was talking about. So we'll go through, there's a notebook to show you how this is working. It's just a function within Glue normally, but they've open source the code so you can see how it's actually working. So you can use machine learning without having to really understand the maths behind it for this purpose, to find duplicates in your data set, even when those records don't have a unique identifier in common, which is really, really helpful in practice. And if none of the fields match entirely. So really recommend this if you're from a data angle. It's a bit off the track, but it's really helpful as an example. And in terms of what is next, so a lot of people get really into certs, and I think it stops some people trying it all. But entry-level certifications on any platforms your organization use are so helpful, and they're really helpful for hatchlings because it gives people validation and enough information to read and understand docs in future, especially on AWS and Azure. There's so much jargon that if you haven't done the entry-level cert, you probably won't be understanding what's actually going on. So that's really helpful. But then if you're a leader, it's really helpful to do the cert yourself, because then you will know what your hatchlings know, and you'll have a really good baseline understanding of what's going on. And you can really just help them to understand where they're at in future. And then you can relate when you are encountering something that they also haven't seen. You can then relate it back to something that you have in common with them because you know what their common knowledge is. So I really can't, I really recommend doing entry-level certs. The entry-level cert in AWS is called Cloud Practitioner. I put off doing it until the start of last year. But it really helped me so much to really level up what I was doing in AWS, because there was so much stuff I just put off learning about because I wasn't interested in it. That I found it really helpful, and it really gave me a lot of momentum. And there's so many different programs to do the cert or get training for the cert. CloudQuest is a really good example. This is only from last week, I believe it was released. The QR code of this, if you're going to click one QR code, this is the one. So it goes through to the YouTube video showing the promo video, and I tweeted this photo of the giraffe in a VR headset, and it's just, this is everything you need to know about the video. But if you don't like normal online courses and you don't like just clicking through pages of docs, this is a really, really good way to snap out of the rut you're in and really just work through fundamentals on cloud and doing things. You build a city, I think, as you go through and do it. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but it's really just a good foundation to move up forward from. And it trains you to do the Cloud Practitioner cert, which is the entry-level cert that I was talking about. So if you're going to learn your Cloud Practitioner with your co-workers or with your hatchlings, if you're a leader, this is a good way to do it. It seems to be a lot like SimCity in that sense, but maybe it'll take off, who knows? And so I'll just go back through the top tips as we wrap up. And hopefully people will have some questions. But number one, the top tip, if you're terrible at names like me, allow yourself to be terrible at names and just find something that works for you. And if you don't like reading the docs, do the game course that's gamified and will really help you to keep engaged, and make sure that you're just finding something that works for you. There's so many different resources to learn, both on Python and AWS. There's so many things out there. So just think about what you can do to find your path within that, or even find the instructors that you really gel with, because that will help you so much when you're trying to learn things in future. Just there's so much to learn, and there will be so much more to learn in future. So working out what works for you in terms of the content that is available and will be available is an absolute evergreen gift, and will keep on giving. The other one is learn X and Y minutes, which is just a handy tip. I really enjoy it. And the book reports, I think this is going to be really exciting if some people start to do them, and it's really helpful in large enterprise as well. Maybe you'll write a book report about this conference after. And don't forget that you're allowed to do things just for fun, even writing your book reports, but allow yourself to be inquisitive and take knowledge of what's around you, and then just be driven by what you're really interested in, rather than what you think will make a startup or what will make you money or what will get you promoted or something like that. This really is the key to, it won't fix your burnout if you are feeling really burnt out, but it will just help you to code for fun again. Because most people that work in tech, that's why they got started, because they were coding for fun at the start. So just find ways to incorporate that into what you're doing a little bit so you can just have fun again. I know it sounds so corny, but hopefully people will do this with the DeepRacer as well. And my last top tip that we just went through is the entry-level certs are helpful. They're helpful in bringing teams together. They're helpful in giving people information and helping them to match. So that was my talk of all the things you can do in AWS once you know Python. If you would like to connect with me, this is where to find me. So in order from most professional to least professional, that's my LinkedIn, my Twitter, and my TikTok. My TikTok is all about cloud careers, tech careers for non-tech people, or helping people to understand what they can do. It's weird. I only started a few months ago, but it's been really helpful. And I've already had so many people reach out that it's helped them to find a path. And it's really exciting when people get certified or message me after that. So it is a weird platform, but it's one I'm having the most fun with lately. I haven't seen any questions come in. Have you seen any questions, Joseph?
We just got our first one.
Cool.
Yep. The question is for the book reports, was there a particular app that you use or recommend by any chance?
Yeah, there isn't a book report app that I know of. When I've done it previously, I've had a physical real life book, which is not very serverless of me. But you can also just make a Google form for free if you already have a Gmail account. Really, really easy. And then you can just set it up. You can even set those up to auto email you the form every so often, which is helpful. But find something that works for your team and then really think about what you want to put in there, because it's a really good team experience to do that, especially if you're crafting a new path for yourself as a leader.